Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something a bit darker, a time of plagues, punishments, and pottage stew. We're going to talk about what life was really like during the Middle Ages. Forget the castles and chivalry Hollywood sold you. The truth? You probably wouldn't survive a single day. But hey, if you're comfortable, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you're genuinely interested. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see where everyone is connecting from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. If you're ready, let's get started. 1. Waking up in a haystack of horrors. Congrats! You've just woken up in 1325. The good news? You're alive. The bad news? So are the fleas. You're lying on a half-rotted straw mattress, filled with bugs and the stench of old hay. It smells like a barn because, well, it used to be one. No memory foam here, no pillows, and definitely no Egyptian cotton sheets. You've got a wool blanket that hasn't been washed since last winter, and now it weighs about the same as a small cow due to the accumulated grime. You blink awake to the sound of church bells clanging in the distance, the medieval equivalent of an alarm clock, only louder and somehow more unforgiving. Your home? A one-room wooden hut, no windows, and a floor plan that can only be described as open concept. Your family, livestock, and household insects share this space with you, and the smell, oh the smell, is an unforgettable blend of stale beer, human sweat, goat, and, well, something you pray isn't mold, but deep down, you know it probably is. Forget scented candles, they haven't been invented yet, and even if they had, they'd just melt into the dirt floor. Stretching your arms feels like a gamble because the air is cold and your joints ache. You're 22 years old, which in medieval terms is roughly middle-aged. Your spine creaks like an old wooden door, and your knees sound like a bag of rocks being shaken by an angry peasant. Getting out of bed? Well, that's its own gamble. The floor is either wet from last night's rain or crusty from some misstep your neighbor's chicken made. Either way, your bare feet are now part of the ecosystem. Privacy? What's that? Your entire family, plus maybe that random cousin who never seems to leave, are all waking up next to you. There are no curtains, no bedrooms, no me time, just a constant shared experience. Welcome to the morning of medieval Europe, where privacy doesn't exist, and neither do hygiene standards. 2. The toilet experience. Now nature calls, and it's not asking politely, it's demanding. Here comes the part where you'll start missing modern bathrooms. No toilets, no seat, no toilet paper, no flush. Hell, not even a plunger. In 1325, using the bathroom is an adventure, a social experiment, and frankly, a public event. As a peasant, your bathroom is likely a wooden bucket behind the house, and it's probably already full, thanks to Uncle Wolf Stan and his bad turnip dinner last night. The smell is nothing short of biblical. You hold your breath, do your business, and then, here's the kicker, you toss it into the street. That's right, the street. You're supposed to shout something like Gardilu, which means watch out below. But honestly, no one moves fast enough. Streets in medieval towns are essentially open sewers, a lovely river of human waste, animal droppings, and mystery liquids. If you're lucky enough to live in a town with public latrines, congrats. You'll sit shoulder to shoulder with strangers in an outhouse where privacy is a myth and ventilation is a cruel joke. Toilet paper? Never heard of it. Most people wipe with straw, leaves, rags, moss, or, if they're feeling particularly fancy, a scrap of wool. Sometimes they wipe with nothing at all, which is probably why handshakes haven't caught on yet. 3. The terrifying breakfast. If you've made it this far, surely breakfast is the reward, right? Sorry, this is medieval Europe. There's no eggs Benedict, no coffee machines, and definitely no avocado toast. Breakfast is a grim affair. You squat near the fire, staring down a wooden bowl of something that looks like it was scraped off a muddy boot. Welcome to your daily ration of pottage. It's a thick, gloopy stew made from whatever's available. Grains, root vegetables, and maybe a few beans if you're lucky. It's been simmering in the same pot for days, sometimes weeks. New ingredients are just dumped on top of the old ones. It's less of a recipe and more of an ongoing edible experiment. On the side, you get a hunk of bread so hard it could deflect arrows. Made from coarse rye or barley flour, it's often bulked up with sawdust, ground up acorns, or other creative ingredients. Wheat? That's for the rich folks. This loaf isn't your friend. You don't slice it, you negotiate with it. Oh, and drinks. No fresh juice or lattes for you. You're drinking weak ale at 6 a.m. Why? Because the water is contaminated with parasites and filth. At least the beer won't kill you immediately. Kids drink it too, not because they want to, but because it's safer than water. 4. Surviving the day as a peasant. By now, you're probably wondering how anyone survived the day as a peasant in medieval Europe. Honestly, barely. Your day revolves around endless labor. Most people are farming, tending to fields that barely provide enough food to survive. It's back-breaking work, and you're at the mercy of nature's whims. If the weather is bad, you're screwed. If the crops fail, you're starving. Most peasants don't eat meat more than a few times a year. And forget about spices. They're reserved for the rich, or maybe for the occasional saint's feast day. The rest of the time, you're just trying to survive the grueling day-to-day. If you're lucky, you get to work your land, but if not, you're toiling away in someone else's field for meager pay. By the end of the day, your muscles ache, your skin is covered in dirt, and you haven't seen a bath in months. Your only comfort is that your fellow peasants are just as miserable as you. The only thing worse than being a peasant in medieval Europe is being a slave. 5. The Black Death and other fun things. Ah, the Black Death, the plague that decimated Europe. Imagine living in a time when every cough, every sneeze, every sore you get could be the death sentence. 1 in 3 people died during the Black Death, and that's just the start. There were other lovely diseases running rampant as well. Dysentery, tuberculosis, leprosy, you name it. If you didn't die from disease, you might just starve to death or get caught in a war. And if you survived all that, you still had to contend with the constant threat of witch hunts. The medieval church was convinced that witches were everywhere, and if you were a woman, you were automatically suspicious. A bad crop, a storm, or even a sick animal could get you accused of witchcraft. Trials were quick and painful, and if you didn't confess under torture, well, you were probably going to be burned at the stake. But hey, at least you gotta leave your medieval nightmare of a life behind. 7. The dangers of travel in medieval Europe. Let's talk about travel. If you ever thought your commute was bad, try crossing a medieval Europe highway. There were no paved roads, no signs, no fast food stops, just narrow dirt paths, often muddied by rain and teeming with bandits. Traveling was dangerous not only because of the possibility of getting robbed, but also due to the constant threat of disease and famine. Roads were filthy, and inns weren't exactly places you'd want to stay the night in. Most of them were little more than dark, cold, rat-infested rooms where you'd be lucky to get a blanket, let alone a clean bed. If you were lucky enough to find a decent inn, it might be filled with other travelers, all packed in together. If you were unlucky, you could end up sleeping on the floor, covered in fleas and lice. And let's not forget, if you were traveling on foot, you could be out on the road for weeks at a time. No car, no horse, just your own 2 legs in the endless stretch of rough, hostile terrain. 8. The medieval diet, a feast or famine situation. Speaking of survival, let's take a closer look at the medieval diet. Most peasants lived off bread, pottage, a watery stew, and whatever else they could scrape together. Meat? Forget it. Unless it was a feast day or you had a lord who was feeling generous, meat was a rare luxury. Fish was a bit more common for those living near the coast, but it was often salted or dried, not fresh. Fruits and vegetables were seasonal, and if you didn't grow them yourself, you probably didn't eat them. The diet was heavily carb-based, bread, porridge, and potatoes if you were lucky. And let's not even talk about the quality of the bread. It was hard, dry, and often made from cheaper grains like rye and barley. For those lucky enough to be wealthy, their meals consisted of meats, cheeses, and sugary desserts. But for the average person, it was a constant battle to get enough food to survive. 9. Medieval entertainment, fun or torture. Now let's discuss medieval entertainment. You might think that entertainment in the past was a lot more wholesome, jousting tournaments, plays, and the like. But the truth is, for most of medieval Europe, entertainment was a luxury only the rich could afford. The average peasant was far too busy just trying to survive to worry about attending a tournament. But for the wealthy, entertainment could come in the form of lavish feasts, hunts, and sometimes even public executions. Yes, public executions were a popular form of entertainment. Crowds would gather to watch criminals, heretics, and witches being burned at the stake, beheaded, or hanged. It was brutal, it was morbid, and it was an event that many people looked forward to. especially in towns where the law was harsh and the punishments even harsher. 10. Disease and medicine, a deadly combination. When it came to medicine, medieval Europe wasn't exactly cutting edge. In fact, most medieval doctors didn't understand much about hygiene, germs, or how diseases spread. They relied on bloodletting, leeches, and potions made from questionable ingredients. If you had a fever, a common cold, or a toothache, you were out of luck. The treatments were often worse than the illness itself. If you were lucky, a healer might give you some herbal remedies, but don't expect anything that would actually help. There were no antibiotics, no vaccines, and no real understanding of how disease worked. If you caught the plague, for example, your chances of surviving were slim. And even if you didn't die from disease, the medical treatments you received could be fatal. There was no anesthesia, so surgeries were done with little to no pain relief. A simple tooth extraction could leave you screaming in agony as a medieval barber surgeon pulled it out with a pair of rusty pliers. 11. The Church's influence, heaven and hell. The medieval church had an enormous influence on every aspect of life. It controlled education, politics, and even the way people viewed the world. If you were a peasant, you had little say in anything, but you were expected to follow the church's teachings and adhere to its rules. And the church wasn't exactly known for its kindness. If you were caught committing a sin, whether it was adultery, stealing, or even questioning the authority of the church, you could be punished severely. The church believed that everyone had to work hard to earn their place in heaven, and that meant following the rules without question. If you were rich and pious, you were guaranteed a spot in heaven. If you were poor and sinful, you were destined for hell. This was a constant source of fear for most people, and the church used that fear to maintain control over the population. 12. The horrors of witch hunts. If you thought the church was bad, consider the witch hunts that took place during the medieval period. Women, and sometimes men, were accused of witchcraft and heresy for things like being too knowledgeable about herbs or speaking out against the church. The punishments for being accused of witchcraft were often brutal. Many were tortured until they confessed, whether they were guilty or not, and if they didn't confess, they were burned at the stake. These witch hunts were incredibly widespread, especially in the 15th and 16th centuries, and they led to the deaths of thousands of innocent people. The fear of witches was so ingrained in medieval society that anyone could be accused at any time, and often those who were accused were the most vulnerable people in society: women, the elderly, or those who were simply a little too different. 13. Medieval justice, trials by ordeal. If you found yourself accused of a crime in medieval Europe, the justice system was far from fair. Trials were often quick and brutal, and the punishment rarely fit the crime. One of the most notorious methods of trial was the trial by ordeal, where a person was subjected to a dangerous test to determine their guilt or innocence. For example, they might be forced to carry a red-hot iron or walk barefoot over hot coals. If they survived without injury, it was considered proof of their innocence, but if they were burned or injured, it was taken as evidence of their guilt. These trials were based on the belief that God would intervene to protect the innocent. Needless to say, they were more about spectacle and superstition than actual justice. 14. The medieval plague, a nightmarish reality. Finally, let's talk about the plague. The Black Death, which ravaged Europe in the 14th century, is one of the most horrifying chapters in human history. It killed an estimated 1/3 of Europe's population. People lived in constant fear of getting sick, and once the plague hit, it spread rapidly, killing millions within months. There was no understanding of how the disease spread, and no real way to treat it. People tried all sorts of remedies, from drinking vinegar to carrying flowers to ward off the bad air. But nothing worked. The plague was a grim reminder of how vulnerable medieval people were to the forces of nature, and how powerless they were to stop it. 15. The end of the Middle Ages, the dawn of a new era. As the Black Death slowly receded and the plague became less frequent, the people of medieval Europe began to see the cracks in the old system. The feudal system, which had dominated for centuries, was starting to crumble. The rise of the merchant class, the growth of cities, and the increasing influence of monarchs all pointed toward a major shift in society. The Middle Ages were coming to an end, and the Renaissance, with its focus on individualism, scientific inquiry, and new ideas, was on the horizon. But the transition wasn't easy. The end of the medieval period was marked by wars, political turmoil, and religious upheaval. The Hundred Years' War between England and France had drained resources, leaving many countries in financial ruin. In addition, the Church, which had once held immense power, was facing challenges. The Great Schism, in which two popes claimed authority, weakened the Church's credibility, and with the printing press emerging as a major technological advancement, knowledge was spreading faster than ever before, challenging the old ways of thinking. Despite the hardships, the end of the Middle Ages marked a turning point in history. The Renaissance brought with it a new age of exploration, art, and learning. People began to think more critically about the world around them, moving away from superstition and relying more on science and reason. The old medieval ways of life slowly faded, replaced by a new, more modern era. But even as Europe moved into this new chapter, the memories of the Middle Ages lingered. The horrors of the Black Death, the oppressive rule of kings, the brutality of the Church, and the constant struggle for survival would be remembered for generations to come. It was a time of fear, suffering, and hardship, but also a time of resilience, adaptability, and transformation. The Middle Ages may have ended, but its legacy would continue to shape the world in ways no one could yet imagine.